I can't stand those pointless gatherings at the country club. It feels like every few weeks, there's some flimsy reason for the wealthy to flaunt their egos with yet another extravagant party. My wife, Carol, on the other hand, lives for these events. Over the last year, her drinking has spiraled out of control, and she's repeatedly humiliated not just herself, but me too. We've been married for 24 years and have 3 kids, all currently in college. We met back when I was working on my MBA, and it seemed like we clicked right away. But about 10 years ago, things between us started going downhill. At the time, I chalked it up to a natural shift in our relationship, though I secretly longed for more affection, more connection. I didn't push it, though. I just accepted that our future might be one without romance. Despite that, I was content with my work, which paid well enough to cover the costs of supporting our family, even with the strain of college tuition. Carol didn't have a job. Instead, she chose to focus on community service and being active in social circles. Her extravagant lifestyle was all funded by my income, which had to remain stable to keep up with her high-spending habits. She looked great for her age, probably thanks to her regular visits to the spa and salon. As for me, I've always seen myself as pretty average, with a little gut and some graying hair. I dressed well, though, mostly because of my work requirements and Carol's constant shopping sprees. Even though I was good at my job, a deep feeling of dissatisfaction gnawed at me. I craved something more fulfilling, something that wasn't just about bringing home a paycheck. I also longed for a change of scenery. Our house was far too large for just the 2 of us, and I resented how much time and money went into maintaining it. But Carol? She didn't want to hear any of that. She loved her massive home, adored the country club scene, and couldn't get enough of her circle of rich friends. At one of those social events, I found myself aimlessly drifting around the club, engaging in meaningless small talk. As the night dragged on, I noticed Carol drinking more than usual. It was impossible not to. She was clearly intoxicated, laughing loudly with a group of local women. I wandered over and heard their conversation veer into some intimate topics. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard Carol's voice cut through the noise. Honestly, if it weren't for Brad Hughes, I'd never have known what good lovemaking was, she blurted out, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing right there. The awkward silence that followed told me the others had noticed me. Carol, slurring her words and giggling like a schoolgirl, finally turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mike, I didn't know you were there. You weren't supposed to hear that." "I'm sorry," she said, still giggling. A couple of the women shuffled away uncomfortably, while the rest stood there in awkward silence. Carol flashed me a mischievous grin, clearly amused with herself. I calmly set my drink down and walked out of the club without a word. But instead of going home, I headed straight to the airport and booked a flight to Reno. Vegas felt too cliché. Reno seemed like a better place to clear my head and think about what had just happened. During the flight, I started to get some much-needed perspective on my marriage with Carol. I figured a weekend away would help me see things even clearer, so I shut off my phone and checked into a casino, putting down $20,000 for a complimentary stay. The thing about casino accounts is that they aren't subject to the same federal regulations. Your deposits can go unreported, though if you win big, you'll have to pay up. I admired how discreet the system was, even though gambling was never really my thing. I slept in until noon the next day and then grabbed a burger and fries, thinking over my situation. Reno felt refreshing, with its pleasant weather and energetic vibe. As I strolled along the Truckee River, I reflected on failed marriages. I wasn't ready to jump into the idea of divorce just yet, but the thought of someday tossing my wedding ring into that river lingered in my mind. On my way back to the hotel, I passed a real estate office and noticed some condo listings in the window. Suddenly, the idea of owning a little place in Reno made perfect sense. After talking with the realtor and driving around for a while, I found a small, furnished unit that seemed just right. Of course, buying it while still married would be tricky, so I set up a lease-to-buy deal with a hefty deposit. The seller agreed. Managing our finances early in our marriage had always been one of my strong points, especially since Carol was clueless about money. She'd always left the bills to me while enjoying the spending. That night, I treated myself to sushi And before heading to bed, I added another $10,000 to my casino account, even though the cash advance fee was steep. The next morning, I grabbed breakfast at the casino restaurant. As I sipped my second cup of coffee, I noticed the waitress had a black eye, despite her efforts to cover it up. She seemed like a nice woman in her mid-40s, but her eagerness to please felt a bit forced, like she was new to the job. Still, I was impressed by her determination, even though she lacked some finesse. "Your name tag says Anna. Is that your real name?" I asked, curious. "No, it's Alice," she replied. But Anna was the closest tag they had. "Well, Alice, I'll take another coffee and leave a big tip if you tell me how you got that black eye," I said. "How about I just refill your cup, and you leave a smaller tip while I ignore that question?" She shot back with a smirk. "Fair enough. I shouldn't have pried," I admitted. Later, with the keys to my new condo in hand, I started gathering a few essentials to make the place livable. My first stop was a used car lot called Silver Spur, where I bought an old Focus sedan. It wasn't much to look at, but it would do for running errands around town, even though I wouldn't trust it for any long trips. Renting seemed pointless since I knew I'd be coming back to Reno more often. I spent a few $100 on basic household items and some extra clothes. That afternoon, I opened accounts at several casinos, writing checks at each one. By the end of the day, I deposited $660,000 across 4 different casinos. I carefully recorded each transaction in a small notebook, noting the amounts, dates, and casino names. It would serve as a record of my supposed gambling losses for the weekend, even though I hadn't gambled a dime. Given my reputation as a terrible poker player, no one would bat an eye at me losing money at roulette, craps, or blackjack. I had 6 months to pull together the down payment for the condo, so I wasn't too worried about it. By the time dinner rolled around, though, I realized I was starving, having completely skipped lunch. I ended up back at the casino restaurant where I had breakfast and, wouldn't you know it, Alice was still working. "You're still here? Must have been a long shift," I commented as she walked over to take my order. "Yeah, pulling double shifts to make ends meet. Rent's higher than I thought it would be out here. Want something to drink?" she responded, sounding a little worn out. I decided not to pry and placed my order, keeping the conversation light. When she brought the bill over, she paused for a moment. "Hey, sorry about how I was this morning," she said softly. "I've been trying to adjust to everything, and well, I've been feeling a bit self-conscious about my eye. My husband gave me that as a parting gift when I mentioned divorce. Hopefully it's the last one." She forced a small smile, tinged with sadness. "Thanks for the generous tip earlier, by the way. It really helps." Her words lingered in my mind all night. That evening, I realized there wasn't much else I could do immediately. I needed to head back home to tie up a few things before moving forward with any of my plans. I booked a flight back easily enough, but I still wasn't sure what my next steps would be once I arrived. The next morning, I found myself back at the same diner, and sure enough, Alice was there again. I managed to grab a table in her section. After finishing my meal, I approached her. "I've got a bit of a situation, and I was wondering if you could help me out," I started. "I need to leave town today, and I won't be back for a week or so. I've got a condo that needs someone to house sit for a couple of months. It's got 2 bedrooms, so you'd have plenty of space. Think you could do it?" She looked at me surprised. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. No strings attached. I just don't like leaving it empty. Most of the time, you'd have the place to yourself. When I'm there, I'll keep out of your way, I promise." I reassured her, though in all honesty, if she cleaned the place out while I was gone, I wouldn't care all that much. But I wasn't about to let her know that. "Is it close enough to walk from here?" she asked, still a bit hesitant. "It's nearby, but I'm leaving you my car, too," I said. "It's a dark blue Ford Focus parked out front. It always has gas for when I'm back, and I'll call ahead before I return. There's an answering machine, so you won't be caught off guard." Alice looked unsure, probably thinking this was too good to be true, but I was running out of time. "Here's the key to the condo and the car," I said, sliding both across the table along with a napkin where I'd scribbled the address. "If you're not comfortable with it, no problem. Just leave the keys, and I'll get them when I come back next Friday. She took the napkin and the keys, still looking a bit uncertain. Alice, really, don't overthink it. If you change your mind, that's perfectly fine. An hour later, I boarded my flight home. Part of me wished I could have just stayed in Reno, but I had things to take care of. When I got back, I picked up my car from the long-term lot and drove straight home. Carol's car wasn't there, so I quickly packed some essentials for the week: clothes, shoes, my laptop, all in under 10 minutes. I also grabbed my passport and birth certificate just in case. My company had some kitchenette-style units available for employees, and I booked one for the next 2 weeks. After charging my laptop, I called my oldest son, David. I explained to him that his mom and I were going through some issues and that I'd be tied up for a while. I asked him to let his sisters, who were both at Auburn University, know, and to reassure them that there was no need to worry. It wasn't ideal paying out-of-state tuition for all 3 kids, but I was managing. After the call, I plugged in my phone, took a much-needed shower, and started thinking about a proper meal. I'd only had peanuts on the plane, and I was hungry. Monday was a whirlwind. First, I hit the bank and took out a hefty second mortgage on the house, well above its current value. By the end of the month, things were going to change, no question. From the bank, I arranged to prepay my kids' tuition at Auburn, wiring $240,000 to the school. After that, I had a cashier's check for just over $200,000, which I planned to take back to Reno. I cashed in 2 CDs, ate the penalties, and closed out my money market account. I decided to leave my credit cards untouched for the time being. When I finally made it into the office, my secretary, Wendy, greeted me with black coffee and a knowing smile. "Good morning, Mr. Terrell. So, are you going to tell me what happened at the country club on Friday? Or should I just believe the rumors?" "Wendy, believe the rumors. They're all true," I replied with a sigh. "So, what do you need me to do?" she asked, all business. "Find everything you can on Brad Hughes. I think he used to work here," I instructed. "Also, make sure the staff handles my scheduled tasks and that no meetings or appointments get changed. Anything else?" With a broad smile and a thumbs up, Wendy got right to work. I had expected things would take weeks to sort out, but now it looked like I could wrap up everything in a week. I made an urgent appointment with my lawyer before leaving. Before heading out, I told Wendy I wasn't taking any calls from Carol, nor would I be returning any. I also instructed security to keep her out of the building. My college buddy, Di Collins, was the perfect guy to handle my divorce. He never liked Carol anyway. When I walked into his office, he didn't waste any time. "I was at the country club on Friday, Mike. I think I know why you're here," Di said. "You're right. I thought I could keep going as long as I wasn't publicly humiliated. But Friday was the last straw," I admitted. Di nodded, his no-nonsense demeanor as sharp as ever. "I'll need access to all your accounts and a couple of powers of attorney. My assistant will draft everything up and give you a call. Is there anything specific I should know about?" "Well, yeah," I replied, feeling a slight weight lift off my shoulders. Friday's events triggered something in me. I've developed a bit of a gambling problem. I spent the weekend in Reno and lost a lot of money. I'm heading back this weekend, and I'm worried it's going to get worse. Di gave me a knowing grin. "That's rough, man. Are you keeping track of all these losses?" "Yeah, I've been keeping a log. I can send you copies." "Good. Mike, we probably shouldn't talk too much more about this," Di suggested with a smirk. "You're right. Anything else you need from me?" I asked. "I'm good. Go take care of your business," he said, handing me a financial worksheet to fill out before our next meeting. It was then that I realized I'd skipped lunch again. Back at the office, Wendy had already prepared a thorough report on Brad Hughes. She suggested I speak with Martha Gable from personnel before taking any action. Now, Martha was the kind of woman who could intimidate just about anyone, with her tightly pulled-back hair and commanding presence. If Wendy thought it was necessary, I figured it must be important. "Good afternoon, Mr. Terrell. Please have a seat." Martha greeted me, her attempt to put me at ease making me feel like a schoolboy in trouble. She closed the office door and sat down across from me. "Wendy briefed me," I don't deal in gossip, only facts. 3 years ago, Brad Hughes confided something in me that I swore to keep confidential. But now I can't uphold that promise. If anything I say upsets you, feel free to walk out. If you disagree, direct your frustrations elsewhere. Are we clear, Mr. Terrell? Martha's tone was firm and direct, setting the stage. Yes, I understand. I can handle whatever it is you have to share without throwing a fit, I replied, trying to lighten the mood with a joke. She wasn't impressed, giving me a slight frown in response. About 3.5 years ago, your wife Carol approached Brad Hughes at a company event. There was heavy drinking that night, and before it ended, Carol and Brad had an affair in one of the private offices. Brad was actually set to get married the following month. Carol threatened to expose their affair unless he continued seeing her. He thought it would stop once he was married, but she persisted, coercing him into ongoing encounters. Eventually, in desperation, Brad sought my help. Ethically, I couldn't disclose this, so I arranged to have him transferred to another office in Dallas. After that, Carol stopped bothering him. Brad never told his wife about any of this, Martha explained, her expression neutral as if she had recounted it 100 times before. I sat there, processing it all. Sounds like Brad was as much a victim as anyone else. I thought I'd want revenge, but now that feels like the wrong approach. Any advice, Ms. Gable? I'd recommend you let it go, given your position. Brad's a valuable employee, and you don't want to risk damaging his career over something your wife started, she said plainly. You're right. Coercing someone into intimacy with Carol is punishment enough, I replied, standing to leave. As I turned to go, Martha added with a smile, and by the way, it's not Mississippi. I've been married for 32 years. It was hard to picture Martha in a romantic context, but apparently, there was a side to her I hadn't seen. As I left her office, I found Wendy had already rearranged my schedule, leaving me with a completely clear afternoon. Carol's calls kept coming, but I ignored them, keeping my focus on the tasks ahead. I had a meeting with the company president the next day and an appointment with the legal department that afternoon. I casually invited Wendy to dinner, but she declined with a laugh, saying her husband would definitely not approve. Maybe you should ask Martha, she joked, grinning. The legal department meeting took longer than I expected. We ended up retaining a few individuals, and I apologized for the delay, which they graciously accepted. Redeeming my retirement plan for a cash settlement turned out to be trickier than I thought. Closing out the shared savings account took time, but it went smoothly enough. Handling my sick leave, vacation time, and company insurance was a breeze compared to everything else. It was becoming increasingly clear that I'd be leaving the company soon, and I hoped Carol wouldn't find out too early. I ate dinner alone that night, and strangely, my thoughts wandered back to Alice. I wondered if she'd moved into the condo yet or if she was still working those double shifts at the casino. Even though I didn't know her well, I felt a strong urge to get back to Reno and see her again. I knew it was foolish to think that way, but I couldn't quite shake the thoughts. The next morning, I cashed in 2 whole life insurance policies and canceled 2 term policies. I was surprised by how much the whole life policies had built up in cash value, more than I had expected. I arranged to pick up the checks. The next day, I took care of some loose ends. While my car was covered by company insurance, I canceled the insurance on Carol's Lexus. The lease was in her name, but the insurance had been under mine. Before heading to work, I swung by Di's office and handed in the financial forms. His secretary had everything prepared for me to sign. Once I got back to the office, Wendy had my coffee ready. As always, not to pile on, boss, but you might want to talk to Stephen Hayes down in settlements before your meeting with Charles, she advised. Charles Parker, the company president, probably already knew what I was planning, but I figured it couldn't hurt to follow Wendy's suggestion. Settlements was tucked away in the basement, a far cry from the well-lit, airy offices upstairs. Felt like a dungeon. Stephen, Wendy said you wanted to see me. I greeted Stephen Hayes, a quiet and efficient worker who led me to a secluded spot. I've heard about the tension in your office. I don't involve myself in rumors, but I thought you should know something. About 6 years ago, we had a guy here named Stephen Hale. He got involved with your wife after some company event. She kept contacting him at work and at home, even when he tried to cut things off. She threatened to tell his wife if he didn't keep seeing her. When he called her bluff, his wife found out anyway and threw him out. He spiraled, started drinking, lost his job. I'm not sure where he is now, but word has it Carol paid his wife $10,000 to keep things quiet, Stephen said, his voice low. I nodded. Thanks for telling me. You did the right thing, Kel. With that, I left his office and headed up to the 9th floor for my meeting with Mr. Parker. Despite being a bit early, Mr. Parker ushered me in without delay. Our meeting was brief, he didn't waste any time. Legal, payroll, and personnel would take care of everything, and he handed me a card with his private number, instructing me to contact him once everything was wrapped up. There were no words of regret or encouragement, just straight business. When I returned to my office, Wendy greeted me with her usual smile. Book me a flight to Reno for Thursday morning with a 2-hour layover in Dallas, I told her. As she worked on it, she gestured out the window. Your wife's out there in the parking lot. She's been arguing with the security guard for over 20 minutes. They're not letting her in, and she refuses to leave. What do you want to do? I glanced outside, watching the scene unfold below. Looks like security's handling it just fine. My only concern right now is finding someone to have dinner with. I really hate eating alone, I said with a sigh. Later, I called Di to check in on the situation. He told me he couldn't make any moves until I had the financial mess sorted. I reassured him I had checks coming in and cash sitting in the bank, and I was preparing to head back to Reno soon, planning to stay there until I ran out of money. Every so often, someone from the office would pop in to inform me that my wife was still trying to reach me. She even had her friends' husbands calling the office to track me down. I stayed at the office for a few more hours, making sure everything was in order for my replacement. As I walked out of the building, there was Carol, sitting on the hood of my car. I didn't want a confrontation, so I was relieved when Wendy handed me the keys to her Honda Civic with a smile. It's the perfect excuse for my husband to pick me up and take me out to dinner, she said with a wink. You're not planning anything reckless in Dallas, are you? Nope, just tying up some loose ends. No revenge, I promise, I replied. I drove to Allentown and had dinner at Outback Steakhouse, and was back at my apartment before midnight. The next morning was a whirlwind. I signed more paperwork for Di, closed all my bank accounts, and canceled every credit card. I even arranged to shut off the utilities at the house by the following week. Collecting the checks from the bank, insurance company, and work made me realize how much I was actually worth. I got a new phone, canceled the old ones, and sold my country club membership to an old friend for $23,000. At work, my replacement, a good guy from Boston, was already settling in. Wendy, being more knowledgeable than me about the inner workings of the office, didn't need to train him. There were still a few personal items at the house I would have liked to retrieve, but they weren't important enough to return for. Wendy insisted I keep her car until my flight, and her husband would pick it up from the airport later. I bought a couple of cheap suitcases to pack up my things from the apartment. Anything I forgot, I could easily buy once I was back in Reno. Suddenly, it hit me that I had taken care of everything. All my assets were now in cash. There were no stocks, no accounts, nothing of value left except the house, which I was leaving for Carol. Air Blue kindly accommodated me by moving up my flight since they had available seats. I called Di from home. Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm flying out tonight. Do you have everything you need? Yep, Mike. I can serve the papers tomorrow, but I still need that financial info soon. You might as well serve them. I'll start sending over proof of Carol's financial irresponsibility soon. Just be careful, Mike. Carol will probably hire some high-profile lawyer from Philly, and things could get messy, Di warned. Just do your best, Di, and keep the bill reasonable. I'll be running low on cash soon enough. And don't forget to look into Stephen Hale. He might need help, and I might be the one to give it to him. Got it, Mike. Safe travels and stay in touch. Before leaving, I called the condo to leave a message about my arrival. Later, I reassured Alice that I'd let her know when I landed, and not to be alarmed if someone came to the door. I wasn't even sure she'd still be staying there, but I hoped she was. It was strange how little I knew her, yet I felt this growing connection. For now, friendship would suffice. I made sure not to exploit her vulnerability. I arrived in Dallas early enough to enjoy a leisurely breakfast. When Brad Hughes walked into his office and saw me sitting there, his displeasure was obvious. "Mr. Anderson, I'd say it's nice to see you, but that'd be a lie." "We both know that," Brad said coldly. "Relax, Brad. I'm not here to reprimand you. I just wanted to clear the air. Let you know there are no hard feelings about what happened," I explained calmly. "You could have said that over the phone," he replied, still confused. "I could have, but I was passing through and felt it was worth saying in person. Look, this wasn't all on you. I was naive and my wife caused most of the trouble. You shouldn't carry more guilt than necessary." Brad looked genuinely surprised. "That's kind of you to say." I'm not sure how to respond. I handed him one of Di's business cards. "Call my lawyer later today. He might need your help, but it'll stay confidential. He might ask you for a notarized statement about the affair, but it won't get back to your wife." We shook hands as I stood to leave. Despite everything, Brad didn't deserve to have his life ruined over a mistake. An hour later, I was on my flight back to Reno, reflecting on where it had all gone wrong. I had worked hard to provide for my family, yet somewhere along the way, I had neglected my wife. In situations like this, it's easy to look inward and blame yourself. I often did. But Carol's betrayal, her blatant disregard for our marriage, was something I couldn't justify or excuse. If she had been discreet, I might have let it go. But she hadn't, and that freed me from guilt. The day ended on a positive note. When I landed at Reno Tahoe International, I was surprised to see Alice waiting for me at baggage claim. She was wearing jeans and a light blue Oxford shirt, a refreshing change from her work uniform. I hadn't intended for her to pick me up. I just wanted to let her know I'd arrived. "Good evening, Alice. I didn't expect to see you," I greeted her. "I thought, since I had your car, it was the least I could do." "Aren't you on duty tonight?" she asked. "Nope. I managed to cut back on hours, thanks to your generous offer," she said with a smile. "Oh, I wasn't being generous. I just wanted an excuse for us to be alone," I teased. "And what do you plan to do now that you have me alone?" she fired back playfully. "I'm not sure yet. Any ideas?" I asked, grabbing my luggage from the carousel. She blushed a little, clearly comfortable enough to joke with me. That was a good sign. About 30 minutes later, we were back at my condo, which had been decorated with small touches that really improved the overall atmosphere without costing much. Grateful for her efforts, I took us out for prime rib dinners. Alice seemed to enjoy the wine more than the steak, and we spent the evening in easy conversation. "How's the divorce coming along?" she asked, taking a sip from her glass. "Not great. I've still got 3 weeks to go before I can even file. You need 6 weeks to establish residency, and despite what everyone told me, I thought it would be a simpler process. I probably should have stayed home and dealt with it there," I admitted. "Why didn't you?" Alice asked, her fork pausing midair as she looked up. "Getting away from Noah was more important than the divorce," she said, glancing down at her plate. "The divorce is just a piece of paper. It doesn't protect me from the abuse. I think I used it as an excuse to leave. The location didn't matter. What was important was that I left," Alice explained, and her words hit home. At first, divorcing Carol felt like a monumental decision, but now I was beginning to question that. All I truly wanted was to keep her from gaining anything more from me. Since I had no plans to remarry, what was the point? We spent the rest of the evening talking about casual things, movies, books, hobbies. Alice didn't have any kids, and I didn't push her for details. That night, we slept in separate bedrooms. By the time I woke up the next morning, Alice had already left for work. There was fresh coffee waiting for me in the kitchen, and honestly, that was all I needed. Still full from the prime rib dinner the night before, I skipped breakfast. After a quick shower, I got down to business. "Di, how's my favorite attorney holding up?" I asked, trying to keep things light over the phone. Di didn't sound amused. "Not worth a dime, Mike. I got some bad news. Promise you won't shoot the messenger." He sighed. I've only been gone for 1 day. What the hell happened now? I asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. Well, Carol found out about your accounts being closed and a few other things. She went straight to the police and somehow managed to get a restraining order against just about everything. All your accounts are frozen, even though you emptied them. You're barred from going near her, the house, and even contacting your kids, despite them being adults. It's mostly nonsense, but it'll take time and a lot of money to untangle. She also contacted the SEC about your 401k and retirement accounts. And on top of all that, she's got the IRS sniffing around. I felt my stomach drop. Di, I'm done. I want no part of this mess. Do you understand? I hear you loud and clear, buddy. Just so you know. She's also hired a private investigator to track you down. How is she even paying for all this? No idea, and frankly, I don't care. But you should know, if the cops or feds come to me for info, I'll have to cooperate. I can't risk my career over this. I get it, Di. Protect yourself. I'll be making some adjustments on my end. This is probably the last time we'll speak for a while. Take care, Mike. I wish things had turned out differently. I hung up, feeling like my carefully constructed plan had just crumbled. My brilliant idea of pretending to lose all my money at the casinos was now out the window. I knew I couldn't rely on anyone else for help, so I had to figure it out on my own. Thankfully, Alice had left me her car, which was a lifesaver. I had no idea how she managed to get to work without it, but I was grateful. I grabbed the small duffel bag stuffed with cash and checks and hit up 6 different casinos to cash them out, swapping the checks for chips and credit. I couldn't risk using any banks. There might have been a trace or hold on my accounts. Casinos, however, were more than happy to handle it discreetly. By the end of the morning, everything was deposited, and I had a bag packed with cash and chips. After grabbing a quick bite, I started the withdrawals. In less than 2 hours, I had converted everything to cash and pulled the money from the casino accounts. No raised eyebrows, no problems. I made the drive to Carson City in under an hour. There, I rented a large safety deposit box at a small, discreet bank and stashed most of the money, leaving myself $55,000 for expenses. With everything secured, I was looking forward to a quiet dinner with Alice to celebrate. But as soon as I stepped into the condo, something felt off. Alice was frantically trying to straighten up things that didn't need fixing. She looked up at me, trying to hide her face, but I could already see the damage. "I'm sorry, Mike. This is my fault," she whispered. "I didn't know he was following me. I didn't realize until I got to the apartment. I should have been more careful." Gently, I moved her hand away from her face. She had a fresh black eye, a swollen lip, and a large bruise forming on her cheek. "Was it Noah?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "He had his 2 brothers with him. They're out looking for you now. Noah told me not to leave the condo." "Where are they looking?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I gave them the names of a few casinos, but they don't know what you look like." "They're not thinking clearly," she said, clearly shaken. "We couldn't stay at the condo, and calling the police wasn't an option. We packed what little we could and left, heading west. We spent the night at a small off-road motel in Grass Valley. There was only 1 bed, but I kept my distance, acting the part of a gentleman. I picked up takeout for us and bought some makeup for Alice to cover the bruises. She did her best, but the marks were still visible. She apologized repeatedly, and I tried to comfort her until she finally drifted off to sleep. The next day, we drove to Sacramento to pick up clothes and personal items. I wasn't sure when we'd be able to go back to the condo, so I extended our stay at the Grass Valley Motel for another 2 nights. Over the following days, Alice and I spent a lot of time together, getting to know one another. Despite the circumstances, there was no intimacy between us, no suggestive conversations. It was just simple companionship. Surprisingly, after only 3 days, I felt more comfortable with her than I had ever felt with Carol in 24 years of marriage. When I wasn't talking to Alice, my thoughts were consumed by everything that had happened. The plans I had worked so hard to set in motion were unraveling before my eyes, and I couldn't stop thinking about what was going to happen next. So I decided to give Di a call. "Hey Di, it's Mike. Just checking in." "Mike, bye. Good to hear from you. Things are still chaotic, but not as bad as you might think. Where are you? He asked. None of your business. Last time we talked, I had half the world after me. Am I still a target? Most of that mess cleared up after Carol got arrested. The IRS is still nosing around your 401k, but other than that, things have calmed down. Wait, what do you mean Carol got arrested? I thought you'd heard by now. You ever meet a guy named Freddie Marvin? Yeah, I ran into him about 3 months ago. He tried to kill me, but some other guys showed up, and I managed to get away. What's he got to do with Carol? Carol hired Marvin to take you out. He got hurt pretty badly in Reno and spilled everything to the police. Turns out she was stiffing him on a $10,000 hit, so he squealed. The cops took him seriously and charged her. She's sitting in jail waiting for trial. She can't make bail. Well, I'd think about helping her out, but considering she tried to have me killed, I'll pass. Her parents can take care of that mess. Let me see what I can do, Mike. Bye. Looks like no one's interested in you anymore, though. You want me to restart the divorce? We've got plenty of solid grounds now. Go ahead. It would simplify things, but honestly, I don't care much about it anymore. I've kept all the paperwork so I can move fast. Oh, and your kids came home after Carol got into trouble. They were worried at first, but didn't take long to lose interest once they found out the truth. They'd like you to get in touch with them, though, just to let them know you're okay. I'll reach out soon. How did your little money laundering plan go? It fell apart. Lost track of everything. I'll check on it next week. Sometimes, even the best plans go to hell. All right, keep in touch. One more thing. Did Carol ever say why she wanted me dead? No clue. I figured it was for the insurance, not realizing you canceled it. After our call, I reached out to the kids. They were relieved to hear their tuition was covered and that I was all right. They asked about Carol, but I wasn't ready to dive into that. Some things were better left unsaid, at least for now. I borrowed a car and made the drive to Carson City, only to find the safety deposit box empty. Alice could have at least left a note, but I wasn't going to complain. After all, I'd given her access. Maybe she'd gone to Guadalajara, or perhaps she was laying low somewhere else. Only one way to find out. Back in San Francisco, I started checking out small travel agencies. Most offered group tours, which didn't suit me at all, but I finally found a last-minute cancellation for a trip to Mexico. My favorite city, as luck would have it. Scraping together enough cash was a struggle. The trip wasn't that expensive, but I didn't have much left. Fortunately, a couple of guys from the restaurant were going, so I wasn't entirely alone. The first 2 days were a letdown. The Libertad market was way bigger than I imagined, and in hindsight, it was a terrible place to try to meet someone. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe Alice had taken the money and fled to some far-flung destination. Bangkok or Tahiti, someplace exotic. There was enough cash in that safety deposit box for her to live comfortably anywhere in the world. I was torn between waiting for her and going on a wild goose chase to find her. In the end, I found myself doing a bit of both. By the third day, the routine was getting old. I was starting to lose hope when, out of nowhere, I heard a familiar voice. About time, Mike. Where have you been? I turned around and there she was, Alice, standing there with her hands on her hips, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat with a red band. I didn't say a word. I just walked over and kissed her for the first time. I should have done it earlier, but I was glad I did now. That's a weak excuse, she teased. Try again. The second kiss came with a big hug, and I lifted her right off the ground. Alice, I've missed you so much. You'll have to fill me in on where you've been, but later. Let's go home and have some lunch. We walked through the market hand in hand. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy and at peace. Mike, don't be mad, but I used some of your money. Most of it's in the bank, but I needed a place to live, so I bought us a house. I hope you don't mind, Alice said, watching me carefully. With all that money? Not at all. I'm sure it's a beautiful place. I smiled. It was a dream come true, living in a gorgeous hacienda with a wonderful woman. Sometimes, plans fall apart, but when they come together, it's a thing of beauty. Meanwhile, Carol's parents finally came through with her bail money and covered her legal fees. Di had no trouble getting her to sign the divorce papers, and it wasn't long before she was sentenced. 5 to 8 years for plotting to have me killed. Brad Hughes had given a deposition to Di, though why he bothered remains a mystery. Not that we needed it. On another front, Di tracked down Stephen Hale, who was sober but struggling. He'd always wanted to run a hot dog cart, so I got him one for $2,400. As for my issues with the IRS, I settled that for $4,000, which was a relief. Marvin ended up in a Nevada jail, along with Noah and his brothers. Their sentences are still up in the air, but at least I knew they were out of the picture. With no more legal worries hanging over me, I was free to return to my old job, and they even threw in a promotion. Alice's Mexican divorce will be finalized soon, and once that's done, we're getting married. The kids are planning to come to the wedding during spring break. As much as we love the house in Guadalajara, it'll just be a vacation home for us. Alice doesn't want to live there full-time, and frankly, neither do I. Wendy's excited for me to return to work. Her new role is a promotion, too, so we're both moving up. Alice is open to wherever we end up as long as we're together, though she's particularly eager for me to introduce her to Carol. That should be an interesting encounter. Life didn't go as planned, but I can't complain. I've got my freedom, my kids, and Alice by my side. That's more than enough for me.